In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, God is one. Amen. Well, for me, this is Monday afternoon, so for you, God willing, it is Tuesday morning or sometime on Tuesday. People like Thekla, it's going to be in the evening, for Margaret also. But today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 10. Woohoo, you say. We've managed to get that far. Only 6 more chapters after this one to go. So I'll read it first, and we're going to do from chapter 10, from verse 1 through to verse 12. So quite a long reading, but you'll see that it's all of it very much of a piece. Then he arose from there and came to the region of Judea by the other side of the Jordan, and multitudes gathered to him again. As he was accustomed, he taught them again. The Pharisees came and asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" testing him. And he answered and said to them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and to dismiss her." And Jesus answered and said to them, "Because of the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate." In the house his disciples also asked him again about this same matter. So he said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if a woman divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." There we go. First of all, a bit that nobody's going to notice is everybody will be fixated now on marriage. That is, verse 1, it says this. Okay, you remember? It says this. Then he arose from there, that's Capernaum, and went to the region of Judea by the other side of the Jordan, and multitudes gathered to him again, and as he was accustomed, he taught them again. Okay, that's a bit that you're going to miss, and it's also a very important bit. So the Lord has left Galilee, and he's gone to Judea. The general direction of flow of travel from now onwards is towards Jerusalem. And now he's within the general ambit of Jerusalem, an area, incidentally, and very importantly, over which Herod was king. And you've got to remember, Herod is king. Oh, the one married to Herodias. Oh, the one who persuaded her daughter to cut off John's head. Oh, John said they were living as adulterers. Oh. Maybe you're getting the point. So the Lord, though, is in that area, approaching towards Jerusalem, and he's going there in order to teach, and he is teaching. And the ordinary folk are hungry for his teaching, and a great ochlos, a great mob, rabble, come out and join him wherever he is. Remember that ochlos? The ochlos is an unruly crowd, not a ruly crowd, not a congregation, but an ochlos, an unruly group of people, and they're hungry to hear from him. And they are hearing him. And now we have to contrast that with the people who come from Jerusalem. Some Pharisees turn up. And they ask him a question, but they're not really interested in the answer insofar as to learn for themselves. They want to trick him, to test him. Now this is where it's really important to remember who the king is, and that is Herod, the one who is committing adultery with his brother's wife. And therefore the Pharisees are wanting to find something they can go back and say to Herod, so that Herod can have Jesus arrested and chop off his head too. So this is anything but a reasonable question that they are asking. How crooked of them. And the question is this: is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Testing him. So hopefully that they'd find something he'd say they could hurry back and tell Herod about. And he then answers and says, "What did Moses command you?" Now, I think the really interesting thing here is not the exact answer that he gives. They read it and pay close attention to it, but I'll talk about that in a moment anyway. But how do we react when people criticize our faith? Especially when they have no intention at all of learning anything from anything we say to them. You know the sort of thing that people do. They come along and say things like, well, if God was good, how would he allow evil to take place in the world? And there's nothing you can say actually to people like that. They're not interested in anything you have to say at all. All they want to do is make themselves look clever and you look foolish. So what does the Lord do? He doesn't bounce into an answer. He immediately turns the question round and says to the Pharisees, well, what does Moses teach? What's in the tradition? You tell me. And they, of course, have to give the answer. That is the standard answer, okay? And the standard answer is, you can issue a bill of divorce and you are now divorced and free to get married again. Actually, some of the rabbis didn't believe that at the time. Some had a very strong teaching about about marriage, saying that you could not dissolve a marriage. Some had a much weaker teaching, and these ones are obviously the ones from the more weak teaching. So they probably would have argued amongst themselves anyway. But the Lord then goes on to comment about their answer. So they've given an answer, he now comments on their answer. And he says, words to the effect of, okay, that's the answer, but I am going to give you a higher demand and a higher theology, and you see if you can refute me. Basically what it is, okay, if you've got a single organism, a man and a woman now, they're joined together, they are one flesh, is it possible to divide them? And of course there's no huge answer to that one. They can't say anything about it. His answer also has the effect within Judaism of making women of much more value. Previously, they had the same status as chattels, as if they were a precious cow or a really important donkey or something like that. They could be dismissed at will because the husband was no longer satisfied with them, and he could then go off and marry another one. But by making it clear that they can no longer be dismissed at will, and that they have an importance, and the importance goes both ways, really greatly affects the way that they had to think about the position of women. It's also interesting at the end that Mark has the Lord saying, okay, and also if a woman divorces her husband, etc., etc., that rarely if ever happened in Judaism. Even nowadays, that is very difficult to take place in Judaism. So it's possible that Mark has this in mind, and it's a sort of something in brackets that he's trying to tell his more Gentile audience. By the way, he's saying, this works both ways for you Romans. You can't divorce your wife, but also she shouldn't divorce you. Okay, bear this in mind. You're equal in this matter. It's probably an added teaching from St. Peter that St. Mark has picked up and decides to add into the gospel there. Okay? You can no longer just dismiss your wife as if she were a donkey that's gone mad. What a terrible way of thinking about it. And then the next thing that's very interesting is this. Privately, the disciples ask him more about this. Okay, in verse 10. In the house, his disciples also asked him again about the same matter. So he then talks about it some more. Now, if you read the same story in Matthew chapter 19, verses 10 and 11, you'll see that the disciples say, well, it's better in that case not to get married if you cannot divorce your wife. And the Lord then says, okay, all people can't accept this, but only to those to whom it has been given. So Matthew makes it clear that this is a counsel of perfection. And if you want to be perfect, this is what you do. You behave in this particular way. And the Lord knows himself that not everybody is going to be able to follow that particular precept. And I think that St. John Chrysostom codifies this in some way rather amusing by saying, marriage is not two cats tied by the tail. In other words, it can be possible to divorce your wife or your husband if actually life is made utterly miserable for you both. But that is not the basic teaching of the Church, and it's well worthwhile rereading that particular passage and seeing what it actually says. It's very hard. Okay, so marriage then. Let's have a quick think about that. Think about, well, what does St. John Chrysostom say about this particular passage? What's it about? The relationships between marriage. First of all, let's think, well, what's the difference between a man or a woman who's married and a man or a woman who becomes a monk or a nun? And St. John Chrysostom says about men, well, the difference between a married man and a monk is this. The married man has a wife, and the same the other way around. In other words, everything you might say about the monastic life, you should also be saying about the married life, and similarly the other way around. Both of them assume the same struggle. It should, of course, a marriage must be Christ-centered. If Christ is not at the very center of your marriage, then really you must ask yourself whether it is a marriage at all. The marriage must grow all the time, or the marriage will perish. You know, the love itself within a marriage must be ongoing and growing. If it becomes ordinary and you begin to ignore each other, then you'll find that actually your love is going to perish. And that means you need to spend proper time together. Another thing is that St. John Chrysostom says is this, that absolutely fundamental to a marriage are the following things: love, tolerance, respect, forgiveness, mutual service, building each other up. Okay, it's quite a big list, that one. And within the relationship of marriage, exactly as within monasticism, you should pursue virtue rather than wealth. So your marriage, your wealth of your marriage is to do with your virtue. How good are you together? And a mutual, ascetical, temperate marriage. So you're still living the ascetical life of a monk or a nun. It is not based on materialistic things. Now that's actually very difficult in our modern secular society, where everything is about pleasure, about getting the most out of things. When you're sick of somebody, okay, dump him and have somebody else. Get a younger model. Dump her, get a younger and more sexy model. That idea of asceticism, of being temperate within a marriage, of actually seeing the other person as the important one within the marriage. Both of you seeing the other person as the important one, rather than being yourself. The other thing that's interesting about St. John Chrysostom is that he then comes on, finally, to the rearing of children. And he says, you know, in modern times, in old times you needed to rear children because you needed to have some sort of posterity, somebody to carry on your name and memory into the future, and your own being is then copied within your children, and you have a certain sort of immortality with that. He said nowadays it's not necessary, because you don't have to have children at all, therefore you don't need to get married, because the Lord will bring you to life at the resurrection. So there's no need to worry about having any sort of posterity. And about children themselves, and it's well worthwhile going off and reading what he says about it, because it's very interesting and actually looks to be written as if you're writing to a very modern audience now. He says, yes, marriage is about rearing children, but the really important relationship is between the parents. If the parents, the mother and the father, they come together, they look after each other, they get that relationship correct, they have that Christ-centered, then actually the children will be brought up within a Christ-centered family and all will be well. And within that he is assuming that you'll take really great responsibility over looking after those young people, those children, that small, important, highly important local church of the family, of which mother and father are abbess and abbot of their own little monastery. Okay, so there we go. But don't forget, the ordinary folk were hungry for the Lord's teaching, and it'd be well worthwhile us ourselves saying, how hungry am I for his teaching? Do I actually long to hear what the Lord is saying? Am I reading my scriptures? And if you're not, then crack to it. Okay, tomorrow, that'll be Wednesday, God willing, 10 at 10, or half an hour at 10, as Margaret always says, then God willing, I should be live. Okay, have a lovely day. Pray for each other. News about Catalin, he is still very ill. They think he won't make it through. So please carry on praying for Catalin with all your heart. They're doing some work with him, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Okay, your prayers. I'd also like you to pray for a man called Joseph, also a Romanian. He has developed cancer. It has now gone all over his body, so he also is exceedingly ill. Okay, so pray for those two. Pray for me, pray for each other. God bless you.